that a marketplace is anything from like Airbnb, where you have your supply and your demand. So you have your hosts on Airbnb and you have your guests. On Etsy, for example, you have your makers and your customers. Uber, you have your driver and your rider. Upwork, you have your consultants and your employers, I suppose you could say. So we're really looking at that kind of two-sided or multi-sided marketplace platform. There are so many different types of different marketplace structures that you can have out there, from market networks to SaaS-enabled marketplaces to your traditional, more transactional type marketplace. So there are many different ways of pursuing a marketplace. And they are coming in more and more different forms, essentially, as well, each with their own advantages. So I don't know if somebody wants to kind of add in here, like it would be really interesting to understand what kind of marketplaces that you're in. I'm just having a bit of a look through your list of the chat here. So we've got madeinaustralia.com, Trainer, Mornington Peninsula Group, skincare products, Italian printables. Very good, great to see. And does anybody want to throw into the chat there what the two sides are that you're actually connecting? It's always really useful to really know who those two sides are. So your demand side, so who they are, your supply side, and then having a think about what it is that the demand side have or want, sorry, and what the supply side actually have that it is that they want as well. So we've got sellers and buyers of Made in Australia products. Very good. I'll keep going forward, but if anybody else would like to add into that, it's always useful to know as we move forward with the presentation. And yeah, we've kind of spoken about this a little bit already, but is it how can you actually get more confidence in your idea and how do you actually go about building it? And that's what I think will be really helpful, hopefully for you guys as well. Soccer coaches and players. Thanks, James. So one of the first steps that I really like to suggest here is actually to start the process for your marketplace idea actually by stopping to start with, which sounds a bit counterintuitive. But one of the biggest mistakes that I see many marketplace entrepreneurs make is that they rush into building their marketplace way too early. And what that happens to do is it really leads them down this path where they commit to a certain direction. They spend time, lots and lots of precious time, which could be months potentially, of developing a particular marketplace idea. Whether they're doing it themselves in the evening after their day job, or whether they actually have a full-blown development team thrown on to actually building the marketplace. What I've seen happen time and time again is that they often end up building the wrong thing in the end. They might build it for the wrong people, the wrong users. They might try and do way too much in the early days as well, as far as features and what they're actually doing. And in the end, it ends up costing them way too much money, too much precious time. And what they realize is months down the track is that they've actually kind of missed the boat, or they've missed this huge opportunity that they could have caught earlier on. So it's always good to try and slow down. If you haven't started building your marketplace already, slow down and just have a bit of a think about the strategy that I'm about to go through in a minute, and see how you can apply that to your business. And if you already have an existing marketplace as well, it's really useful to have a think about the strategy that I'm about to talk through. And by following the strategy, it's actually going to help you to really solidify the foundations of your existing marketplace as well. And it's going to help you to really figure out how to get that traction happening further for you. Now, I just want to share a couple of examples. So Hello Parking is one of the marketplaces that they started this quite a few years ago now, and they actually ended up closing the business down. And one of the reasons for closing down basically was the fact that the product that they ended up building didn't actually meet the audience's needs. And they realized that, or basically I'll read what they've got here. So the truth is that we huddled together to decide on ideas that sounded nice. We built prototypes, put our salesman's hats on. We didn't understand why we weren't closing deals. We never defined a clear hypothesis, developed experiments, and we've rarely had meaningful conversations with our target end users. And while we had some wonderful advisors in the parking industry, we should have met with everyone we could have got our hands on. So basically what they're talking there is that they should have really got out and spoken to people and really figured out what it was that they needed to build before they started building. or at least throughout the process of been continually having those conversations. And that's one of the things you'll see from today. Another example as well is of Neighbor. So they say that we spent far too much time building and stressing over the parts of the site that were like 10 assumptions deep. There were 50 ways we could have made money, but we had 0 ways of actually making money. For a long time, we spun our wheels trying to figure out the disconnect. Maybe we should have raised more money. We just needed to get more media coverage now that we've nailed that last A/B test. Perhaps it was just our design that didn't pop. No, wait, it might be that we were just too focused and we should expand into bikes and drills. Now, for anyone who's had a startup before, marketplace or not marketplace, this is a constant struggle of you're trying to figure out which direction to really focus on. And sometimes it can be really hard to kind of figure out what's going wrong in the journey. And again, this is something that hopefully the strategy that I'm about to show you will really help you to kind of figure out some of this stuff early on, as early on in your journey as possible. And it's all really about maximizing that value and not output. I mean, as founders of startups, we work so hard to try and get that traction that we're looking for. So this is about kind of working smarter and not harder, which is always a good value to have, I think, as a startup, as an entrepreneur. Now, my big argument is technology in the early days is a distraction, particularly in those early days, because we spend so much time and get caught up in the color of this button or where this needs to go or what features we need to have in, but we lose sight of what it is that we really need to be working on at that particular point in time. What you really want to be doing is really focusing in on the people in your marketplace, or connecting these people, to be precise. You see, after all, marketplaces are really all about connecting people. They're about connecting somebody who has something to somebody who wants something. Technology is really just there to help you scale. And if you can't make it work without technology, you're going to really struggle to make it actually work with technology. And it can be a big waste of time and money if you don't figure out how to make that work in the early days, as far as if you can do it without technology. So what is the key? My theory is it's all about the intricacies. What I've found through my work in working with marketplaces and helping them to optimize their product so that it can build traction is often it's those little intricacies that make a huge difference. And if you can understand and discover what these intricacies mean for your business, for your marketplace before you build, or even while you're building, or if you're in that traction stage, the earlier you can identify those intricacies, the better. They really do help you to really define what your marketplace should be. Often it's the seemingly smallest fear that a user might have that really prevents them from transacting through your marketplace and might hold them back. You might think that they want this, but really what they want is that. There might be a wrong word, like instead of store, you might use the word share, and that's that one little word can make a huge difference in your business. You might have the wrong category of listings on your site, for example, or there might be a different spin on your concept that you may have missed as well. And it's these little tiny things that can make a really, really big difference. And you don't want to miss these intricacies, because the sooner you do figure that out, can really transition the full business. And it's impossible to guess this stuff. You really need to live it. So what you want to do is, before you start to build, by discovering these intricacies without technology, it helps you to be really, really flexible, to be agile and to move fast, to save money. Ultimately, it helps you to build a better product that exceeds everyone's expectations before you've even started building. Remember, it's all about connecting people together. So it's all about gaining the understanding that you can never gain through a computer screen. It's about discovering those finer details, which are really going to matter. So one of the big things I found with any marketplace is what you plan to build from day one often looks completely different in 6 months' time. And for anybody who's been through this process, I'm sure you can vouch for this as well. And in 12 months' time, again, it's going to look completely different again. So my theory is the more agile you can keep it in the early days, the more flexible you can keep it, the more lessons you can learn earlier on in the piece, the better, because it means that you can build the end product as close to what it needs to be as early as possible. And that's really the way it should be. You really need to be prepared for this. You need to be agile from day one. You don't want to spend a ton of money building the perfect first version. You want to learn as much as you can, lo-fi. Because it's only really once you start doing the business that you actually will really start to see what users really need. Only then you'll start to see the patterns that you need, the features that your users need, the problems that you're really solving, and where the opportunities really lie. So for example, like your idea, you might be over here and you're so focused on your idea, you actually miss the real opportunity. So by looking and trying to approach this in a lo-fi way initially, it really helps you to identify where this real opportunity could be, because you don't want to miss that, or you don't want to realize it after you've already built something if you can. And what you think that they need, you might think that they need this, but really what they need is something like this over here. So again, the earlier you can figure out what that is, the better, regardless of whether it's idea, you're at the idea stage, or even if you're in that traction stage. The earlier you can identify these differences, the sooner you can really modify your path and really get traction happening. But how do you learn about these intricacies without building? It's a good question, and it's something that often comes up when we're talking about this. And this is where I've introduced the idea of this whole creating 5 success stories challenge. So it's where basically I challenge everyone who's got a marketplace idea or is in that traction stage to actually go out, to drop technology just for a minute and go out and create 5 success stories of their marketplace lo-fi. So in other words, what I want you to do is really take your idea and find ways to connect both sides of your marketplace together so that they can experience your offering without using a purpose-built website or your marketplace. I want you to do these things that don't scale, get your hands dirty, pick up the phone, meet the people, negotiate and connect both sides of the marketplace together manually. And it is hard work initially, and that's good because this is where all those learnings really happen. So remember, at the end of the day, your marketplace is all about connecting people together. Technology is simply there to help you scale. So, and that's the mindset that I really want you to go into this challenge really thinking about. Now, if we look at Airbnb, as we all know, Airbnb, you've got your guests on one side and you've got your hosts on the other. You have somebody who wants to stay somewhere and somebody who has that space available. And all Airbnb do is essentially connect those two together. Now, obviously, it's a lot more complex than that when you actually look at the platform that they've built, but at its core simplicity, that's it. And Uber, you've got the rider who wants to go somewhere and you have the driver who can take them there. And again, at its core, that's what it's all about. So take a couple of minutes now, just have a bit of a think about your marketplace. Now, what are those two sides that you're connecting? What is it that you're exchanging? So what is it that the demand want? What is it that supply have? Just as we said with Uber and with Airbnb, at its core simplicity, this is what your marketplace is about. So by finding lo-fi ways to facilitate these kind of connections, what you're able to do is actually learn so much more than you ever could by putting up a marketplace MVP and hoping for the best. These conversations that you're going to be having with the individuals on each side of your marketplace are like the learnings from that are just so valuable that it's impossible to put it into words until you actually go out and do the exercise. That's when you really start to realize the power in this. So it's in these conversations that where the surprises really start to unfold. You'll find the aha moments, you'll find the oh moments. And this is where you really start to identify where the opportunities are. You'll find what work's involved, and it'll give you complete clarity and confidence on what it is that you need to do going forward. And it's these that are absolutely priceless. One of the things that often happens, and this is actually one of the great things about this exercise, is that you might have a marketplace idea, particularly if you're new to the whole concept of a marketplace and having a startup and so on. By doing this exercise, it can be a bit of a reality check, which can be a bit scary for some people sometimes, in that realizing exactly what kind of work is involved in actually making these connections happen. A lot of people seem to think that building a marketplace and launching a marketplace is as simple as building a website and then and then it'll just work. Marketplaces are amazing and you can scale them globally, which is true, but there's a lot of work involved in actually making that happen. And it's those intricacies that I mentioned before that really, really do make or break a marketplace. And there's a lot of work that can be involved in actually getting your supply on board and getting your demand on board as well. And running a marketplace is a bit like flying a really, really tricky plane to fly, like a really old school plane, where it's really wobbly, and you'll be constantly modifying you'll be bringing more supply in, and suddenly you need more demand, then you need more supply to match that demand. And then it's this constant game, which is one of the great and exciting things about running a marketplace. But doing this exercise is actually, this 5 success story exercise is really valuable in really understanding what work can be involved, and also the mindset of your users as well. So definitely encourage you to try and do that regardless of what stage you're at. Now, what the journey might look like for anyone who has a marketplace idea is that before you build, what you want to do is go out and do your first lo-fi success story, and then go into your first 5 lo-fi success stories. And by then you might go on and do some more. You'll have some processes in place, and chances are you'll actually accidentally create more success stories along this path. But what that does is really set you up for this next stage here, where you start to think about your MVP. This is where you start to actually think about, all right, this is how it worked in real life, how it worked offline. We know what people need. We know what questions they need answered. Now we can start to put that onto a website. And this isn't necessarily a marketplace. This might be something as simple as a landing page with a call to action on it, with a Google spreadsheet behind it. And that's fine. And that's all you need to do to get started. It's quite common. Some common advice is to do things that don't scale. And that's so true for marketplaces. You really do need to find these things that don't scale initially. You need to fake it where you need to. Like, for example, you might have a call to action button on your website, and behind the scenes, it's just you basically, or you might have an assistant that's helping you to kind of manually go through and do some connections and make some recommendations or whatever it is. But you don't necessarily need to build your full marketplace. And in fact, if you can keep it as lo-fi's, like lo-fi's in offline, then you start to bring it online with this MVP, your first MVP. It helps you to really start to get those lessons early. It helps you to really refine your thinking, refine the opportunity, really understand what language needs to be on the website. It helps you understand exactly what needs to be built. You might find that you have in your mind that you want to build a marketplace that's like Airbnb, where there's all the listings there available, and there's a search functionality, and somebody can come in and just do a search and find all the listings that are relevant to them. But what you might find in the early days is actually you need to provide a recommendation engine, where there is somebody comes along, they complete a quiz on your website, for example, which might be just a basic website, and there's a quiz and they answer a few questions, and then suddenly from there they'll be able to go in, and the questions that they answer will actually come through to you in your email, and you manually behind the scenes be able to go in and make that recommendation for them, for example. And you might find that shift from that search UX to the recommendation engine is actually quite different. But if you were to build that from day one and then realize that you actually needed a recommendation engine, you suddenly spent all this time building something that wasn't necessarily the right thing for you and your business at this particular point in time. So these are the kind of things that we're really looking for. Once you've got your first version of your MVP, it's a minimal viable product, you'll have your first transaction that'll come through online, and that'll create a success story for yourself. Then you've got your 5 success stories online. And then from there, you start to build out into the marketplace. And during this time here is where you can start kind of doing your planning, designing the marketplace, and you'll keep kind of having transactions coming into your business throughout that time as you're actually building your actual real marketplace. And then that's where you can start looking at your steady incomes, your steady $1,000 a month, $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month and plus. So it's a good journey to kind of have in mind. And that's why I like to think of it. Like, you really do want to get these lo-fi success stories initially, and then moving up in the world from there. So how do you go about doing it? So instead of building an MVP like we just spoke about, what you want to do is start with that lo-fi MVP. And that means about getting really creative. It means thinking about the core problem that your marketplace is solving, It means also leaving some expectations at the door potentially as well, and just really starting to think through things a little bit differently. So what is it that actually makes a success story when I talk about these 5 success stories? So you're kind of thinking about it in this way. You want to find a way to manually connect the 2 parties together, your supply and your demand. You want them to both say yes to your offer. So whatever it is that you want your marketplace to do, you want both your supply to say, yep, I want to be involved, and your demand to say, yep, I'll pay for that. You'll find your best way to actually match and connect them together. And I'll give you an example in a minute on that one. You'll find an exchange. You want them to exchange or have a transaction that is made. Ideally, the best case scenario is you can actually exchange, there can be a transaction, a financial payment for the exchange that's happening. So for example, in Airbnb's case, if you were testing that scenario, you'd want to see that a guest would actually be willing to pay to stay on somebody's couch, for example. But in this early days, if they don't actually pay, it's not the end of the world, but it is a nice to have. And that does mean that you get your first customers before you've even built your website. And you want to have both sides actually having a positive experience and getting the results that they want. So it's all about having their expectations met. And ideally, you want to walk away from this process with a testimonial in your hand that you can put into your website once you actually do build your website. You want to potentially have a paying customer, and ideally, you'll also have a supplier that can be added to your marketplace database. So this becomes the basis of your marketplace as you move forward. So when you are ready to actually build your marketplace, what you'll hopefully have is a spreadsheet with all your suppliers already listed in there. You already have a relationship with them because you've been dealing with them manually. And you may have some paying customers. And if you're doing really well, and you might have some recurring paying customers, you can transition into your marketplace once it's live. So that's essentially what could make up a success story. Now, it may vary depending on what your marketplace idea is or your concept, but it's a good way of kind of structuring that thinking. So how do you go about creating this lo-fi marketplace, this lo-fi MVP? So a couple of different steps. So what you want to do is really start to think about what is it that your users want, both on your supply side and your demand side. Which of these sides is going to be harder to convince? So you might find that there's one particular side of your marketplace that is a lot harder to actually get on board. And that's always good to know, because what we find is when you're building out a marketplace, and this goes for anybody who's got an existing marketplace that they're trying to get traction for as well, what you'll typically notice is that there's one side that's harder to get traction for than the other. And that varies as well. Like one day for 1 month, it might be harder to get supply side, and then you might find that it actually shifts around to the other side, and you'll kind of shift your focus a bit. But what you want to make sure you're always doing is not always focusing on building traction for the easiest side of the marketplace. You want to focus your efforts on the harder side. And that can be a really hard mental battle as well, because you want to go where you're getting the success. So for example, if you are getting a bunch of supplies and they're all listing up, and your supply database is growing really quickly, and it's just becoming almost effortless to grow your supply side, but suddenly your demand side, it's hard to get the customers to come on board to actually transact. In that case, you need to stop at that point and start to identify that, hey, actually the supply side is coming together really nicely, and that's great, but we need to just really turn our focus to that harder side. We need to really focus in on our customers, because at the end of the day, if our supply don't have customers coming to them, they're going to leave as well, and we're not going to have a marketplace. So the big tip there is always focus on the harder side, keeping that equilibrium obviously, but focusing on that harder side is going to help you to really get that traction going. Now, where do they hang out? So what channels do you have where your users for your supply and your demand hang out? What do you want them to actually do? So what kind of call to action is it that you want them to do as part of this experiment they're about to do? And then it's a matter of brainstorming ways to actually get them to take this action. So I'm going to give you an example now. This is a marketplace idea that I was working on a couple of years ago. And I've since put it on ice, but I thought I'd share this example anyway, because it was one that I went through this process, and the results that I had from it were actually really, really interesting. And they really did transform the way I was thinking about the marketplace idea that I was working on. So the idea was all about connecting artists with Airbnb hosts and helping them to collaborate together to actually style an Airbnb. So on one side, we've got the demand, which are the Airbnb hosts. On the other side, we've got artists. Now, looking at that process that we just spoke through, so what is it that the Airbnb hosts wanted? Well, they want a better Airbnb, or better looking Airbnb. They want to style it so they can increase the bookings and increase their fees. On the supply side, the artists wanted more exposure and more sales of their art. And then where were they all hanging out? So what I found was on Facebook, there were some really great active Airbnb host Facebook groups. And the same for the artists as well. So there were some artist Facebook groups that were really active and that were very much aligned with my thinking as far as what this concept was aiming for. And what is that action that I want these people to take in my experiment? So I discovered that there was a couple of different ways forward, but the most obvious one was to actually have the Airbnb host to actually create a brief, a design brief essentially, for what they were looking for as far as what they wanted their Airbnb to look like once it was start up. And I had, so the goal was to basically have Airbnb hosts give me that brief. And on the other side of things, what was it that I needed the artists to do in order to make this successful, in order to really test out this experiment? And what I needed from them was a portfolio, which would allow me to really match up the brief with the portfolio. That way I could match the artists with the Airbnb host and then they could collaborate from there. So that was the kind of thinking, and that was those few steps there that we need to go through. And this was the experiment that I ended up running. So what I ended up doing, those two Facebook groups that I mentioned, on the Airbnb hosts Facebook group, I ended up putting a post in there saying, hey everyone, I'm looking for Airbnb hosts who like to style their Airbnb property by collaborating with artists and Etsy makers. You see, I have a group of artists, photographers, makers who are keen to collaborate with you in order to create a unique Airbnb experience for your guests. First of all, they're open to a range of cost-effective terms from free placement, subsidized placement, and purchase placement of decor items. If you're interested, please PM me so you can so I can send you more details. And then I had a screenshot there with just kind of what I was thinking, a bit of just a design. There's nothing more than a design there at that stage. And then on the other side, I found, as I said, a artist Facebook group. And in that one, I said, hey, everyone, in the spirit of getting art recognized, which was the name of the Facebook group, I'm on the hunt for artists, photographers, illustrators who'd be interested in collaborating with Airbnb hosts to help decorate their rental spaces. Over the next few weeks, I have decor briefs coming in from Airbnb hosts who are looking to collaborate with artists, photographers, makers who can help them to decorate their spaces in a unique, stylish way. If you'd be interested in learning more, PM me. PS is a perfect opportunity to use websites like Society6 and Redbubble to turn your art into decor products and promote your art in a new way. Happy to answer any questions on these. And again, same kind of special invite that I've included in the image. And as you'll see, the responses that I received from that, let's move that. So I had 5 Airbnb hosts who'd liked that post in that particular group. I did this in a few other groups as well. On this particular post, I had 24 people like it and 48 comments. So you'll see by the dates, these were about 4 days apart. Now, one of the things, I guess a couple of things I kind of mentioned here, at this point, I didn't have the artists, and at this point, I didn't have the Airbnb hosts either, which is something that you need to kind of weigh up is like, how do you go about handling this? And it is something that a lot of marketplaces will do where they kind of fake it till they make it, so to speak. I was confident that I could get both these people lined up. But yeah, it's just something that you need to tread carefully with and just make sure you're managing everyone's expectations and things like that all the way through. And on the other thing to note as well is if you're using Facebook posts to do this and Facebook groups, for example, you need to be really mindful of the rules that those Facebook groups have. And you've got to be really careful about how you actually put these posts in there. But this gives you an idea of if you get creative about it. There are different ways to really get that attention and to really start to test out your idea. Now, my goal for this experiment was basically what I wanted to achieve was have 5 briefs from the Airbnb host submitted, and I wanted to have 8 artists submitted. And if it got to that point, then my next step was to basically to look for ways to actually pair the briefs up with relevant artists. And it was a really, really interesting experiment, and actually ended up getting eight hosts who submitted their briefs. Artist wise, I had, I think it might have been close to the 24. I know it was definitely over 20 artists within a week or two that were really interested in collaborating as well. And what was really interesting in that experiment was that I started to see the types of, like, it became really clear to me that the Airbnb hosts, for example, so they submitted their briefs, and say somebody might have a particular brief for, they wanted to have a Bali styled Airbnb, for example. It became quite clear that not any artist could provide that particular decor. So that was one of the intricacies, I suppose you could say, that I started to realize that I couldn't just have any artists and assume that they're going to match the briefs from the Airbnb. I'd actually going to need a high level of artists available to start to respond to the briefs. I'm just trying to think what other lessons that are out of that. There's a lot of kind of little details that started to really test the concept that I was thinking, what I had in my head. And yeah, it was a really, really interesting experiment. So I actually moved the way through. I had those briefs. I actually started working with the artists to help them figure out how to work with the Airbnb hosts. And what became really clear, and this is something that I'm really glad I learned at this stage, is that I really, there was a missing party. There was a missing user group that I hadn't considered. So the whole pitch for this whole platform was the fact that Airbnb hosts would end up with a fully styled space, which was the name of the business, Fully Styled Spaces. And what became clear through this collaboration effort, and by trying to do this manually, was that the artists actually didn't necessarily know anything about styling a house. They were artists, they were makers. They didn't know how to, like, they didn't know anything about interior design. And it became clear that the missing piece of the puzzle was actually the interior designer. And suddenly a two-sided marketplace became a three-sided marketplace. And it was at that point that I was beginning to realize the amount of work that was involved in trying to connect all the dots. And it's something that could definitely be done. But the intricacies became very clear to me as to what, there was a lot of thinking that needed to happen. Now, I made a personal choice at that point not to pursue it any further as I become pregnant, and I didn't have the headspace to work on a startup as well as my existing business, and then have a baby as well at the same time. So that was kind of the process that I ended up going through there. But that whole experiment was so enlightening, and I'm really glad that I went down that journey. Actually, one of the other things that did come out of this as well, actually, I should have showed this. I forgot about this. Yeah, so once the Airbnb, once the artists had gone in and submitted their brief, they basically were sent over into the Facebook group. And this is a private Facebook group that I'd set up for the artists. And this is where I was collaborating with them and getting them really excited about what was happening. You can see here that we had a count of how many briefs we had coming in. And where they were from, and giving them a bit of an idea of what was out there, and really starting to generate that interest and that excitement as well. So that was working really, really well. And one of the other things that come out of this as well was this gave me the opportunity to actually speak to, I put a call out into one of the Facebook groups that I'm in, which is a general business Facebook group. And Tara Dennis, who some of you may know from Better Homes and Gardens, she's the interior designer on that show. And this is a conversation between me and her. And it was amazing just to see that you can put this post out into this group. Somebody recommended that I spoke to her. I sent her a message, and before I know it, I'm on the phone to her. And she was absolutely so lovely, and she gave me so much advice. And one of the reasons why I went down that path was that she was an interior designer, and that was my call out basically. But yeah, I really wanted to try and understand that interior designer piece of the puzzle that I needed to fill that third side of the marketplace. So it's amazing once you start to kind of put those calls out there to try and figure out the details of how your marketplace could work, what could actually eventuate from that. So yeah, so that was amazing. So coming back to how you can actually start to apply this to your business. So from that example there, I'm just going to go through those steps again. So we had the Airbnb hosts, we had the artists. We knew the Airbnb hosts were looking to increase their bookings and their fees, and we wanted to style their Airbnb. And we knew that the artists wanted more exposure and sale of their art. We've got the Facebook groups where we knew they were both active in, different Facebook groups where they were both active. And then the call to action, which is probably one of the most important bits, is we wanted the Airbnb host to create a brief and submit that. And we wanted the artist to send a portfolio. Now, how that would have looked in a marketplace sense in the long term, if I had gone through and actually built the marketplace, I imagine, but again, things change and what you think you're going to build is going to be different in 6 months and 12 months time. But what I imagined it would have looked something like was the supply side, the artists would be uploading their art and their decor and what they had available to allow Airbnb hosts to browse and discover their profile and what they could do. And on the other side, I'd imagine that the Airbnb host would have a button in the top right hand corner potentially where they could submit their brief essentially. And from there, they would add in what they were looking for, and then the artist could actually go through and browse those briefs as well and apply and things like that. So that's kind of how I envision that all coming together. So again, looking at that process, so that's all those questions that we looked at. What are some tactics that you could use to get started in this? So thinking about that call to action. So what are other manual ways that you could potentially start to kickstart your success stories? You could go through and create a quiz, for example, and this is how you would get the demand for your marketplace and what it is that you're offering. And one of the thoughts here is that you'd have a quiz, you'd have the customer, so to speak, enter in what it is that they're looking for. And so, for example, if you look at kind of Upwork as a model, as a marketplace model, you could have a quiz, which is essentially what jobs they're looking to have filled. And then what you could do as far as your 5 success stories, which are lo-fi, from that quiz, you could then actually manually go out and basically do a search yourself to try and find contractors, for example, that fit that particular brief essentially, or that particular requirement. And what's really useful in doing that is that you can basically, all you do then is look for your customers, you look for your demand, you understand what it is that they're looking for because they tell you in a quiz. And then from there, you can go out and find that supply. And then that means you're finding the exact supply that they need. You're adding that supplier to your spreadsheet where you have that you're building up now. And then that way in 6 months' time or whenever you launch your marketplace, you've already got that relationship with your supplier and you know it's going to match the needs of your customer. So that's one example. You could have an exclusive membership for a newsletter, for example, to say if you've got particular products. In the early days, you're not going to have a lot of products out there. But say if it was t-shirt designs, for example, what you could have is that t-shirt design being sent out in a newsletter once a day, once a week, and you could be promoting a single product that an artist or whoever has designed that t-shirt's going out to your user base. So it's a simple newsletter. Now it's still lo-fi, you're not building a website. If you can get even more manual than that, where you're actually speaking to people. Generally, technology is going to come into play somewhere because we live in 2021 and that's kind of what life is like at the moment. But you can see how you can start to get really creative about how do you emulate what it is that you want to build with your marketplace before you build it, so you can start to really get those pieces of the puzzle together. Other ways you can put out posts like I did. We have people looking for X, can you help? Or we have X, do you want some? So in other words, we have people that already have this particular thing and they're looking to rent it out, for example. Other ways you could focus on acquiring the demand, as I just mentioned then with the quiz, go out, find the supply, and then add the supply to the database. So it makes your life easier next time. So again, it's unlimited the amount of ways you could actually do this. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Now, these aren't necessarily all marketplaces, but they're a good example of lo-fi ways of getting started. Facebook is a really great way of getting started as well, as you'll see with these couple of examples. So there is a brand, Lolly Wally Doodle. Never heard of them before myself, but anyway, in their particular example, though, they have actually set up a Facebook page to sell her handmade dresses. And what you do is actually have the customers to leave a comment with their email address, their size, quantity, and any customization request to make a purchase. And that allowed her to really quickly react to their preferences and would be able to actually, as it says here, brief off the most designs that were getting the best response. So she actually designed products around what people were asking for rather than designing products and hoping for the best. So using that thinking can be really, really valuable. Black Milk, which is a tights brand from memory, or a fashion brand. So they, again, use Facebook as well, where they could actually get like-minded people all together. And that was a great way of actually creating products based on what their people were asking for, rather than vice versa. And then they ended up creating a group as well where girls could swap and buy and sell their purchases with each other as well. And that can be done via Facebook groups as well. Facebook is, as much as I hate to spruik Facebook all the time, it is really valuable for doing things like this, where you can actually create that Facebook group and bring together your supply side or bring together your customers and actually start to really nurture them before you even have a website. So I do think it's a very valuable source. In saying that, though, there's other platforms where you could do the same kind of thing, but I think that community, that tight-knit community, can be really key. Etsy as well. So in the early days of Etsy, basically the founders, they used to run a web design shop, and they were working for a website called Get Crafty, and they discovered a need for a marketplace for handmade crafts. So what they ended up doing while they were actually building Etsy, they'd end up going out to all the different craft fairs and would actually start to tap into the user base that actually go around visiting craft stalls and so on, and actually start to recruit people that way and really generate interest before they'd even launched Etsy. So there's these ways that are really useful for really building that manual way of getting that interest up before you launch or before you build. A couple of other examples here. So say, for example, you had a marketplace where you wanted to have home cooked meals delivered to the elderly. If we look at demand side as being the elderly, on the supply side, you have cooks. Demand side, they want their food delivered. On the supply side, get paid for cooking or cook for free if it was more of a volunteer type setup. Then you've got to think about, where do you actually start to get in contact with the people? Where do they hang out? Retirement villages, NDIS, and so on. One of the interesting things about this one, just by purely doing this exercise, it starts to raise these questions of, oh, it actually might be quite tricky to get the elderly onto a computer, for example. And what you might start to do, the thought process here is actually, well, maybe elderly aren't actually our target audience. Are they going to be the ones that will be making the decisions? Maybe it'll be their children will be making decisions. And then you need to start thinking about, all right, where did they hang out, since they're the decision maker? So it is all about kind of starting to think about these questions, and it's going to bring up some big questions for you. And that's really good. That's what you want. You want to be asking the hard questions now before you start building, because once you start building, it's really hard to pivot. Obviously you can pivot, but it can be costly. It can take so much time to change angles. So the more you know in this early stage, the better. On the supply side, so cooks, for example, so it's going to be geographically constrained type marketplace. So you're going to need to really focus on a particular geography. You're going to, like, local Facebook groups, for example, or a cooking school or somewhere like that would be a good place to find cooks. And your call to action. So, for example, on the demand side, they might be selecting from a menu or placing a request for a particular meal. And again, this is where you start thinking about your business model of what is going to be the best way for them to actually make their selection. Do they want to select from a menu? Do they want to place a request? If they are placing a request, how are we going to find cooks that can actually deliver that particular thing that they're asking for? And then as far from menu, well, do you have one menu per cook? Do you have a range of different menus per cook, on the website from different cooks? You have one core menu that everybody cooks from. And this is where, again, all those questions start to come up. And on the cook side, you want them to say yes to cooking from this menu if you go down the set menu path, or do they suggest their own? Another example, just check the time, got 10 minutes. Renting out tools. So for example, renters, homeowners, airtaskers might need some tools to borrow. What they need is to either use a tool or get a particular result. Where can we find them? Maybe a local Facebook group, a men's shed. We can get creative about that and think about other channels as well. call to action, tell us what you're looking for and we'll find it for you, or we can give them a supply list of what's available in the area. And again, that's starting to think through that business model and what's going to work, and you'll find out what it is that they want to do as well. And you might find that model might actually shift over time to as your demand and your supply actually increase. On the other side, we've got tool owners. They want to get paid from their idled assets or at least help somebody. And again, maybe it's local Facebook groups and men sheds. And maybe the call to action is someone is looking for X, can you help? You can get paid for renting that out, and so on. And a t-shirt design platform, so I kind of touched on before. So on one side, you might have buyers. On one side, you might have artists and makers. They, on the demand side, they want to buy a shirt that's based on something that they love. Would depend on the niche as to where you'd find them. But if you're in a niche area, you could try and tap into that. The call to action, sign up to our membership to discover a new exclusive shirt design each day. And then, so that would be one way of kind of putting that call out to see if there's interest on that side. And then on the other side, you could, so that would be all about looking at artists, helping them to sell their designs. Where could you find them in those different community groups, and then send us your design or 3 and we'll include it in our daily newsletter. And then you can look at ways to monetize that potentially as well at the same time. So as you can see, there's a few different ways to really start to break that down. But this step process is a really great way to start to really think through that idea and start to figure out how you actually validate it. That's a tactics which we looked at. Yeah, so ready to design your lo-fi marketplace. And oh, that's right. So basically from everything we've gone through today has been really talking about the structure and how you can start to think about either validating your marketplace idea, or if you are building, how you can start to build the supply side potentially before you actually get it to market. Or if you're in the traction stage, if you can take a step back from your marketplace and actually use it as an experiment to forget about your marketplace for a little bit, not for too long, but just step away from it and try and see what connections you can make in a manual way, how you can make them offline. And that might just help you to overcome hurdles that might be holding back your traction. So it's a really interesting experiment. And underlying all of this, basically, I haven't got time to go through it today, but is essentially there's a list of marketplace success criteria. There's about 30 different elements that basically we like to look at as far as helping you to build a strong marketplace, regardless of whether you're in that idea stage, building, traction, and so on. Basically, there's things like you want to start in a constrained area. So if you don't want to start your marketplace where you're going too wide too early, that's one of the biggest mistakes you can make as a marketplace. So you want to really focus on either a geographic location, you want to focus on a category and get really known in that. You want to really refine your processes as early on as possible in that particular area, that location, that category. And as you really start to finesse that, then you can start to build it out. And why that's important is that you want to really build up the supply side so they're getting a great experience. And you want to ensure that everybody's kind of being matched up with and meeting their expectations of what they want your marketplace to do. So constraints are an important one. Looking at how if you can be close to the payment flow, for example, is always helpful. Making sure you're addressing a particular need that's an actual real need. If you can find a marketplace idea or an angle where people are actively looking to solve that problem, it's going to make it a lot easier to do the marketing for you, for example. So there's a big checklist that I go through, and it's a bit of it can be a bit of a process, but it's also helpful just to have that checklist to know what to kind of look at as how you can actually strengthen your marketplace foundation. So I can't go through all of it now, but if you want to send me an email, my email is just there. So beck@beckfay.com. I'll happily send you out some details about that particular success criteria, which can be really, really helpful. So that's about it. Did anybody have any questions that they want to either turn their microphone on for, or are we going for time? Got a couple of minutes for questions if anybody wanted to ask any.
Beck, this is Don.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Beck, do you do like sort of like advisory, sort of like mentoring or consulting regarding the early stages of the marketplaces, or do you do those kind of services?
I do, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm at capacity at the moment, but if you want to send me an email, I can send you some details and
yeah. Cool. No worries. Yeah, we'll do.
Did anybody else have any other questions? Pretty quiet by the sounds of it.
Paul, I know you had some questions regarding marketplaces. Do you have anything specific or in relation to some of the other startups you're working with as well?
Really, I think it's always a challenge to get your suppliers, on board, and you just need to find some way of giving it a go, and preferably, low-fi. I like that phrase. Without spending a heap of money. No, look, I guess that, I've got a lot of takeaways from what you've said, Beck. So thank you very much. And I think, like, originally when people would sign up as a supplier, they'd receive an automated email. And, if you've got hundreds of suppliers signing up every day, that's fine. But, why not personalize it, or even give them a call?
That's very true. Yeah, it's a great opportunity. Anytime you can speak to a real person and try not to hide behind your website, there's just so much to learn from just speaking to people. And it's easy to forget when we work on the internet all the time, it's so easy just to kind of hide behind the website, so to speak. But yeah, those conversations you have are so valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I think there's a question there, but yeah, good point. Definitely onboarding. I think onboarding suppliers, I've found 3 years into the journey that automation isn't always the best thing, and now we spend a lot more time onboarding suppliers and book them in for a demo. But there's a question there around what's the best way to monetize your lo-fi versus MVP to have necessary funds to build your marketplace?
That's a really good question. It's going to depend on the type of marketplace that you have, I think. One of the best resources that I absolutely love, and I'm adamant that it's can be so useful for somebody who has an idea for a marketplace. There's a guy by the name of Russell Brunson, and he talks about funnels and how to basically use like a webinar funnel almost to actually build and educate your user base around what it is that you're offering. Basically, a lot of marketplaces are out there to disrupt an industry, which means it's an educational component. And what he talks about is how to use a funnel to basically educate people while selling smaller products. So it might be a small educational product, for example, it's related to your marketplace. It helps to really educate your potential users, and it leads them into the idea of actually becoming a supplier in your marketplace, or leads them into the idea of becoming a loyal customer. And it's a really interesting methodology. He doesn't talk about marketplaces at all, but I do think his techniques are really interesting. And if with the right creative brain on, I think you can really apply some thinking about creating those little small products that he talks about. And his big thing is that if you can create a funnel where you're selling something for, there's a really great image that really demonstrates this in his book, but he talks about selling a product that's like a $7 product or a $10 product. And there's a value ladder where you sell something for a bit more and then a bit more. And that first product, for example, the whole idea of that first $7 product is to purely cover the cost of your pay-per-click advertising, for example. That way you're at the point where you use your pay-per-click advertising to drive people into your site. Then you sell the $7 product, which is providing education to your audience. And then from there, you know that you're actually making maybe $2 on that particular order, for example, and suddenly you're actually starting to become cash flow positive just from your marketing. It's a great way of kind of building up both at the same time. So that's one of the techniques that I think is really, really interesting, and that could be applied to marketplaces. But yeah, it does really depend. Thanks for life. Yeah, Russell Brunson, he's the guy behind ClickFunnels. He's a little bit American salesy. If you can get past that bit, he's absolute genius. Like, I love his stuff. He's really, really on the ball with it all. So I think there's different ways of kind of exploring revenue, but that's just one example of what you could do with a bit of creative thinking.
And just a question from me, sorry. What I guess are some of the trends, or how are you seeing marketplaces evolve, I guess, to the next step?
Really great question. I think some of the things we're seeing now is the evolution where marketplaces aren't necessarily just marketplaces anymore. They're evolving into market networks, for example. And the whole idea of a market network is where if you imagine 3 circles overlapping, one's your marketplace where you have transactions happening. And that's what we've been used to seeing through, say, Airbnb. Then your next pillar of that is some kind of SaaS tool or some kind of tool that helps somebody achieve a particular result. And then overlay that is your network, which is where people will have profiles and start to connect with each other and collaborate together. House is a really good example of that done well. It's got all those components in it. It's really that next level of marketplace. And SaaS-enabled marketplaces are another one as well, where we're seeing a lot of SaaS products. They're either being created initially with the thought of becoming a marketplace, so if you look at Eventbrite, for example, Eventbrite was originally a product that was developed to help people who were running events to run their events more smoothly. And then over time, that's transitioned into becoming a marketplace. So it's really got that SaaS tool underneath it. And what's really great about that model is that you're building a tool for one particular audience, and you're not dealing with the challenges of the chicken or the egg, because you're just focused on one audience, and then that particular audience bring in the other side. So they bring in the demand, they bring in the participants for the events, for example. So that's another one that I think is really starting to grow as well.
Excellent. Probably just time for one last question. I know there was someone who was about to ask a question just before.
Oh, that was me, James.
Oh, great, Paul. Yeah.
Look, it's probably a double-barrel question. One argument I've had from a supplier was, oh, I don't want to have to look after another, website. I don't want to have to look after my stuff on another website. And because it's so easy for people now to set up their own website, what's the advantage of having them? Well, what are the selling points you can for listing on a marketplace rather than just being standalone?
So them having their own website versus having them on your marketplace as well. Is that the question?
Correct. Yeah.
I think one of the big sells is the fact that you're bringing audience to them. So you're actually increasing their sales by them being there. What can be useful is to try and tap into like having a look at what technology they're using to run their website, and is there a way of not increasing their workload and kind of connect it somehow. So say if it's Shopify, for example, is there a way of kind of connecting to Shopify? I'm not sure if there is or not, but so if you can try and find ways to reduce their workload, might kind of help them to overcome that objection. But yeah, I think I guess it's looking at your value as well and what kind of value you can bring for them. So you want to try and avoid the only promise you give your suppliers as being, we're going to bring you more business, because it means that you kind of get trapped in this. You always have to bring them business all the time. And if you drop the ball, they're going to potentially leave your marketplace. Where if you can build the value proposition for your suppliers around something that has true value for them, that isn't just more money, more leads, blah, blah, blah. If it's more about we make your existing business better, we help you make your day easier. That's where that SaaS tool thinking can really be helpful. If you can create some kind of tool in amongst your platform that helps them to do their job better, it's going to really help you. It's going to keep them more loyal to your platform for longer, because you're not only bringing them leads, and you're not dependent on bringing them leads to keep their business, but you're actually helping them in other ways as well. There's a good YouTube video. I'm just trying to think who. I think there's some really great YouTube videos out there. If you go to Marketplace Conference on YouTube, there's some fantastic speakers on there. And there's also NFX, so the letter NFX, which is short for Network Effects. They've got some amazing content as well on YouTube, which are worthwhile looking at. So it might help too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Fantastic. So we might wrap it up there for today. I'd like to really thank Beck for jumping on and taking us through that webinar. I have recorded as well, so I'll send out a recording of that if you do want to go over that, because it was quite a short amount of time to get through a heap of content. So that's been amazing. And if you do want to reach out to Beck, obviously she's got her details there. If you do want to book any mentoring sessions in with any of the mentors at Work My Own Way, check out workmyway.com.au and just click on appointments there. But thank you again for jumping on this Friday afternoon, wherever you are. And hope to see you at the next workshop or at a mentoring session.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
And have a great week.
Thank you. Thanks, Beck.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.